You never expect your morning tea to come with a death threat. But for billionaire Elias Vance, that's exactly what happened. One folded note from a trembling waitress, and suddenly he wasn't just fighting for his company. He was fighting for his life. Before we begin, let us know in the comment section where you are watching from. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps us bring more profound stories that you can't afford to miss. The rain had a way of softening the edges of St. Louis. It dripped off the eaves of old brick buildings and turned cracked pavement into mirrors, catching fractured reflections of passing headlights. A breeze whipped down the street, smelling faintly of wet concrete and diesel. Pedestrians ducked under hoods and umbrellas, quickening their pace past corner stores and bus stops. Elias Vance blended in for once. A green overcoat, cheap by his standards, hung heavy on his shoulders, dampened at the edges by the weather. His shoes weren't custom-made Italian leather. They were scuffed boots from a discount store. He walked alone. No driver. No polished SUV idling at the curb. No security detail trailing 2 paces behind. It was an oddly liberating sensation. No one glanced twice at him. He wasn't a billionaire this afternoon. Just another face in the drizzle. He crossed the street toward a squat building whose neon sign buzzed faintly against the gray sky. Hazel's Diner. A handful of fogged-up windows hid the warmth inside. A bell over the door gave a tired jingle as he pushed it open, and heat wrapped around him like a soft blanket. The diner smelled of frying bacon, black coffee, and the faint citrusy tang of disinfectant. It wasn't glamorous. Vinyl booths with cracked seams lined the walls. A jukebox near the door played something bluesy and slow, almost drowned out by the chatter of the lunch crowd. But to Elias it was perfect. A place no one would expect him to be. He shook rain from his sleeves and slid into a booth at the back corner. Close enough to observe the room, far enough to be ignored. A waitress passed him a laminated menu, and he barely looked at it. "Just tea," he said. "Earl Grey, if you've got it." She nodded absently and moved on. Elias leaned back and exhaled, forcing his shoulders to unclench. The last few weeks had been a relentless drumbeat of frustration. Unexplained financial losses, evasive answers from his CFO, board members telling him to focus on expansion, not details. They didn't understand. He built this company with his hands. He didn't delegate away the heartbeat of Vance Tech. $27 million. Gone. Not vaporized. Not delayed. Missing. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling that familiar pulse of tension behind his eyes. He could still hear the calm, patronizing tone of one of the board members during last week's meeting. "Elias, you need to trust the system. We've got auditors." Trust the system. The system was what he'd built. But systems could rot from the inside. A door banged near the kitchen, pulling him back to the present. He tapped his fingertips against the table, a habit from his years in leaner times, waiting for investors who didn't believe in clean energy or second chances. Those early days felt distant now. Billionaires didn't sit in diners anymore. But today, he wasn't a billionaire. Today, he was hunting. The waitress returned with a simple white cup on a saucer, steam curling from the surface. She was younger than he'd expected. Mid to late 20s, with caramel-brown skin and hair tucked beneath a black bandana. Her uniform was neat but worn at the seams. She balanced the tray like someone who'd done it 1,000 times, but there was a flicker, barely visible, in the way her hands trembled. Their eyes met briefly, and something subtle passed between them. Recognition. Fear. Before he could place it, she set the saucer down in front of him and stepped back with the polished smile of someone who survived on tips and silence. It was only after she turned away that he noticed the folded piece of paper tucked neatly under the saucer. Small, square, deliberate. For a second, he thought it might be a receipt. But the edges were too crisp. He pulled it out with 2 fingers. The paper was damp at the corners but still legible. 3 short lines, written in a firm, clean hand. "Read this somewhere private. They know who you are. And someone wants you dead." The diner around him suddenly felt sharper. The clatter of dishes at the counter rang louder. The laughter from a nearby table cut too close. Elias read the words twice, then a third time. He had spent years facing corporate predators, hostile takeovers, political lobbyists, energy conglomerates who would rather see him buried than let him disrupt their profits. But this felt different. This wasn't metaphorical war. This was real. He folded the note back carefully, sliding it into the inside pocket of his coat. His hand brushed against his phone, but he didn't pull it out. He'd come here without the usual team, without the firewall of security he'd built around his name. No one even knew he was in St. Louis, which meant whoever wrote this note knew more than they should. He forced himself to stay seated for 30 seconds more, stirring the tea like nothing was wrong. Across the diner, the young waitress moved between tables with practiced ease. She didn't look back at him once. That was the part that unsettled him most. Elias left 2 20s on the table, far more than the bill, and stood. The bell over the door chimed softly as he stepped back into the rain. The cold hit his face, sharp and real. Rain fell harder now, slanting against the windshield of the parked cars. He walked quickly, turning down a side street before glancing over his shoulder. No one followed. Still, his heartbeat echoed in his ears louder than the rain. Maya Brooks had worked at Hazel's Diner for almost 3 years, and she'd never slipped a note to anyone before. Her fingers still tingled from the contact, from the weight of what she'd done. She ducked into the break room between orders, heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't the kind of decision you could take back. She'd spent weeks watching men in expensive coats leave the plant across the street at odd hours, weeks noticing how money from the diner's tip pool kept vanishing, weeks feeling the icy gaze of Kevin Murphy, the district manager who seemed to have a chokehold on everyone's silence. But the man at table 7 wasn't like the others. She'd recognized him the moment he walked in, not from tabloids, but from a Forbes cover she'd seen at the library last year. The same jawline, the same scar near his ear. Elias Vance. The name on every paycheck across the river. She hadn't meant to write the note. Not at first. But the fear had built to a breaking point. She couldn't trust the police. Not with Kevin's connections. She couldn't trust her coworkers. They had kids, debts, reasons to stay quiet. But maybe she could trust him. The man they were stealing from. Her breath fogged the narrow window. Out there, he was walking away through the rain, shoulders squared. No bodyguards. No black SUV. Just a man in an overcoat who shouldn't have been here at all. Brooks. A voice barked from the kitchen. Kevin. She shoved the door open, grabbed a tray, and forced herself back into the rhythm of the lunch rush. But she felt it now, the shift. Like the air before a storm. Elias walked 2 blocks before stopping beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. His pulse hadn't settled. He opened the note again, the ink slightly blurred from his damp hands. They know who you are. And someone wants you dead. There were a dozen possible explanations. A prank. A setup. A threat from one of the enemies he'd made over the years, of which there were many. But the precision of the message gnawed at him. It wasn't a warning for a type of man. It was aimed at him. Someone inside the plant or the diner, or both, knew who he really was despite the measures he'd taken to disappear. He'd used a pseudonym to book the motel, paid cash for the rental car, wore plain clothes, even skipped his smartwatch. Yet here was proof. His cover had already cracked. Elias's instincts had kept him alive in boardrooms where one wrong move could cost millions. Those same instincts told him this wasn't random. He slipped the note back into his coat, glanced once down the street, and started walking. Not fast, not slow. Just a man in the rain heading nowhere in particular. But his mind was racing. This was supposed to have been quiet. A week, maybe 2. Enough time to walk the perimeter of his bleeding operation, talk to a few people, figure out where the money was disappearing before anyone realized the man asking questions was the owner himself. Now the quiet was gone. He turned another corner, the streets emptier here. A single bus rumbled by, splashing through puddles. He caught his reflection in a darkened shop window. Wet hair plastered to his forehead, overcoat clinging to his frame. He didn't look like a billionaire. Just another tired man in the rain. For the first time in a long time, He didn't feel insulated by money. And for some reason, that made everything sharper. Back at the diner, Maya wiped down a counter she'd already cleaned twice. Kevin Murphy leaned against the far wall, sipping coffee like he owned the place. Maybe, in a way, he did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who carried his authority like a weapon. Everyone in the diner moved differently when he was around. Quieter, smaller. Maya felt his gaze like a hand around her throat. She kept her eyes down. If Kevin suspected anything, she'd be out of a job, or worse, before she could blink. "Busy today," Kevin said finally, setting his mug down with a thunk. "You keeping up, sweetheart?" "Yes, sir." She hated the way her voice sounded. Careful, practiced. He smirked. Good. Wouldn't want to lose another star employee. The word lose hung heavy between them. Malik's face flashed in her mind. Her brother's easy grin, the way he joked about moving them out of the neighborhood once he saved enough. And then, gone. She forced a nod, picked up a tray, and moved to another table. She could feel Kevin's eyes on her back. The note was already out in the world. No going back now. Elias reached his motel 30 minutes later. The building was an old roadside affair. Paint flaking off the facade, a neon vacancy sign that flickered every few seconds. He'd chosen it for exactly that reason. A place no one paid attention to. His room smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. A single lamp cast a weak circle of light onto the bed. He hung the overcoat on the back of a chair, sat on the edge of the mattress, and took out the note again. The edges were softening from the rain. The words stared back at him like a challenge. "They know who you are. And someone wants you dead." He pulled out his burner phone and opened an encrypted file. Financial records, internal memos, shipping schedules. $27 million missing wasn't a clerical error. Someone was bleeding the company slowly, deliberately. And now it was clear, they weren't just stealing from him. They wanted him out of the way. He thought about his board. About Calder. About the clean reports that never answered the real questions. And then he thought about the waitress. Her trembling hands. The way she hadn't looked back at him after sliding the note across the table. That was the move of someone terrified, but determined. Whoever she was, she'd just become part of this. Hours later, long after the lunch rush had ended, Hazel's diner was quiet. Rain streaked the windows in thin silver lines. Maya stood at the sink, rinsing glasses and pretending not to think. But she was thinking. About the black SUVs that sometimes parked across from the plant at night. About the envelopes she'd seen exchanged between Kevin and strangers at the loading dock. About the whisper that spread through the kitchen staff after Malik disappeared. Don't ask questions if you want to stay breathing. She'd been so careful. Keeping her head down. Pretending not to notice. But when the man with the scar on his jaw walked in, something inside her snapped. If anyone could make noise about this without getting buried, it was him. "Clock out, Brooks," Kevin called from the doorway, breaking her thoughts. "See you tomorrow." "Good night," she murmured, drying her hands on her apron. She slipped out into the night with the weight of rain on her shoulders and dread in her chest. The streetlights cast long, watery shadows across the pavement. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed. She tightened her grip on her bag and walked faster. Elias didn't sleep. He sat at the small table in his motel room, going over the details in his head. The financial bleed wasn't random. It had a pattern, a pulsing, quiet siphon buried in procurement and logistics. Someone was moving something big through his facility. And if they knew who he was, it meant this wasn't just about money anymore. He turned the note over in his hand until the paper began to fray at the folds. His heartbeat had finally slowed. But the decision had already been made. He'd come here to quietly observe. Now he was going to dig. Rain hammered on the motel roof, a steady rhythm in the darkness. Outside, in a corner booth of a nearby 24-hour diner, two men in dark coats watched the parking lot where Elias's Ford was parked. One of them stirred his coffee with mechanical patience. "He got the message," the first man muttered. The second one didn't look up. "Good. Let him run." The first man smirked. "You think he'll bolt?" No, the second man said. He'll do exactly what men like him always do. What's that? Try to fix everything himself. Back in his room, Elias lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, the note on the bedside table like a tiny bomb waiting to go off. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard his mother's voice, steady, stubborn. If someone tries to take what's yours, you fight like hell. He closed his eyes. The rain kept falling. Tomorrow he'd start asking questions. But tonight, he let the weight of 11 words settle into his bones. Maya reached her apartment building just past midnight. The hallway light flickered as she climbed the stairs. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. Amara was sleeping soundly in the next room, curled up with a worn stuffed rabbit. Maya leaned against the door for a moment, breathing out all the tension she'd carried through the shift. Her fingers brushed the bandana still tied around her hair. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She didn't know who Elias Vance really was beyond the headlines. But if the whispers she'd overheard were true, time was running out. For Malik, for her, for anyone caught in the middle of this. Her eyes fell on the small wooden floorboard near the heater, the one that creaked differently than the rest. She knelt, pried it up, and pulled out the spiral notebook hidden inside. Truck plate numbers, dates, times, names, everything she'd collected. Everything no one would believe if she were gone. She closed the floorboard and stood in the quiet, hugging the notebook to her chest. You've started it now, she told herself. No going back. Outside, the rain beat against the windows like knuckles on glass. Elias woke before dawn, his body still buzzing with unease. The city was quiet now. No traffic. Just the distant drip of rain in the alley. He dressed in silence, grabbed the note, and tucked it into his coat pocket. There was no telling who was watching or what they'd already planned. But one thing was certain. Whatever game had started inside Hazel's diner, he wasn't going to play by their rules. Morning came quietly, smudged gray by low clouds and the kind of mist that clung to the streets like breath on cold glass. Elias Vance sat in the driver's seat of his rented Ford, watching raindrops race down the windshield in thin, nervous rivulets. The dashboard clock read 11:36 a.m. His half-empty coffee sat cooling in the cup holder. He'd been parked across from Hazel's diner for 20 minutes, debating whether to go in. It wasn't that he was afraid of a folded note. He'd faced men far more dangerous than waitresses with secrets. But the difference between last night's boardroom battles and today was simple. Boardrooms didn't kill you. This felt different. Real. Close. He scanned the front windows of the diner. Steam fogged the glass, and shadows moved behind the curtains. Everything looked ordinary. Trucks rolling past, someone in a yellow raincoat hurrying down the block, the faint sound of the diner bell jingling each time someone came or went. And yet, under the surface, something had already changed. He opened the door and stepped into the drizzle. The rain had lost its bite, but the chill lingered like a warning. He crossed the street slowly, scanning every face in the diner as he pushed through the door. The same warmth hit him. The same clinking dishes. The same jukebox humming in the corner. But this time he wasn't just an undercover billionaire pretending to be nobody. This time he was being watched too. Maya noticed him the moment the bell chimed. She'd been refilling a sugar caddy at the counter, pretending not to glance toward the door every few minutes. She'd half expected him not to come back. Maybe she'd scared him off. But when she saw him, wet hair, green overcoat, that same quiet, searching gaze, something tight in her chest loosened just slightly. He had come back. She forced herself to look busy, to act like he was just another customer. But as he slid into the same booth in the corner, she felt every beat of her pulse behind her ribs. No name. No signature. Just enough. When she approached his table, she was careful. Neutral smile, tray balanced, nothing that would give her away. He ordered the same thing. Earl Grey. She set the cup down, tucked the folded napkin beneath it, and walked away without a word. Elias waited until she disappeared into the kitchen before reaching for the napkin. River Walk. 9 p.m. Don't bring anyone. His thumb brushed over the ink. She wasn't bluffing. Whatever this was, it wasn't a mistake. He folded the napkin and slipped it into his coat. From where he sat, he could see her at the counter, head bent, listening to another waitress say something between orders. Her face didn't show fear, not exactly. But there was a guardedness there. Like someone living in a house where every floorboard creaked too loud. Then he saw Kevin Murphy. The man leaned against the far wall near the kitchen door, thick arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't smiling, wasn't talking, just watching. And when Elias's gaze briefly met his, Kevin's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a grin. A warning dressed like politeness. Elias paid and left before his tea even cooled. He spent the rest of the day trying to be still, which had never come naturally to him. Back at the motel, the air smelled of wet carpet and stale smoke. He sat at the table with the napkin beside the folded note from the day before. 2 messages, 11 words and 1 address. He pulled up a map of the Riverwalk. It was a stretch of old industrial land along the Mississippi, half redeveloped into a public promenade, half still empty warehouses with broken windows. Isolated enough for a private meeting. Exposed enough to make him wonder if this was a trap. But he couldn't shake the image of her hands shaking as she served him tea. People with nothing to lose didn't look like that. People terrified for their lives did. He checked his watch. 7:52 p.m. The rain had slowed to a misting drizzle, the sky turning dark as the streetlights buzzed on one by one. He zipped his coat and left. The Mississippi at night carried its own kind of quiet. Not silence exactly. There was the constant hum of distant traffic, the murmur of water hitting pylons, the occasional low groan of a barge drifting past, but it was the kind of quiet that waited. The Riverwalk's lampposts cast soft golden pools on the wet pavement. Across the water, the city glimmered in broken reflections. Elias stood under one of the lights, hands tucked into his coat pockets. It wasn't paranoia making him check his surroundings every 30 seconds. It was instinct. Someone who built an empire from nothing learned to listen to the wrong kind of silence. At exactly 9:03 she appeared. Maya walked briskly along the path, hood pulled low against the mist, a small messenger bag slung across her chest. She didn't look at him right away. Her steps were measured, deliberate. He waited. Let her approach first. She stopped just a few feet away, her eyes flicking over the shadows behind him before settling on his face. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure this wasn't a setup," he replied. She gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Yeah, same." For a moment, they stood there in the dim light, the sound of the river filling the space between them. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought yesterday, but not naive. Her eyes had the hard edges of someone who'd seen enough of the world to stop trusting it. He nodded toward the napkin. "You wrote it." "I did." "Why?" She exhaled. "Because someone has to." They moved to a nearby bench beneath a wide umbrella of an overhanging tree, shielded from the drizzle. Maya sat on one end, elbows on her knees, wringing her hands. Elias remained standing for a beat, watching the dark water, before sitting beside her. She didn't waste time. "I know who you are." Elias didn't flinch, but inside something shifted. "Do you?" "Elias Vance, CEO. Forbes cover last year." She pointed to her own cheek. "The scar gave you away." He didn't confirm or deny. She didn't need him to. "I work at Hazel's," she continued. "Across the street from your plant. I've been working there for almost 3 years. And for almost that long, I've been watching things happen that don't make sense. Big things." "What kind of things?" "Vans. No company logos. Showing up at the back gate after midnight. Men in suits who don't eat, don't talk, just wait. And then they leave." She swallowed. "A few months ago, my brother Malik started working janitorial shifts inside the plant. He's the one who first said something wasn't right." The way she said his name carried a weight Elias recognized. It wasn't just information. It was personal. "He told me they were moving stuff out," she said. Stuff that didn't match any of the supply manifests. Elias's brow furrowed. "You've seen the manifests." "No. But Malik was good with numbers." He kept track. He said there was something else going through that loading dock. What happened to him? She looked away. The streetlight caught the edge of the tears she was trying to blink back. 3 weeks ago, he texted me. Just one line. Vance needs to know. It's not batteries they're moving. And then he didn't come home. Elias's jaw tightened. She looked back at him. I know how it sounds. I'm just a waitress. But my brother's not some criminal. He disappeared because he tried to warn someone. And you're warning me, Elias said slowly. Her hands were shaking again, but her voice stayed steady. If I don't speak now, I'll disappear too. Elias leaned back slightly, the mist softening everything except the hard edge of what she just told him. The financial losses, the evasive board, the hidden trucks, it wasn't theoretical anymore. It had names. Faces. A missing man. He'd always known there were sharks circling his empire. He hadn't expected the teeth to be this close to the bone. Why me? He asked quietly. Why not the police? She barked a laugh that was more pain than humor. The same reason Malik didn't. Kevin Murphy, the district manager at the diner, he's in deep with some people. You make too much noise, and it disappears. Not the problem. You. Her eyes darted to the far end of the walkway. People like me don't survive taking on people like that. Elias followed her gaze. A black SUV rolled slowly along the narrow street above the riverwalk, tinted windows catching the lamplight like cold eyes. Maya flinched, shoulders tensing. She didn't have to explain. Don't turn around, she whispered. That's been parked outside the diner almost every night this week. Elias didn't move, didn't look directly. But every sense sharpened. His old survival instincts, honed not in alleyways but in hostile negotiations where power was just as lethal, lit up like flares. She wasn't lying. The SUV idled for a few seconds, then rolled on, disappearing around the corner. The sound of its engine faded, but the tension it left behind stayed like smoke in the air. Maya hugged her arms close. They know everything. They know who comes and goes. Who talks? If they see me with you. Elias nodded once. Then this has to stay between us. A gust of wind swept down the river, rattling the branches overhead. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The current lapped softly against the retaining wall, as if marking the seconds. Finally, Elias said, You're risking everything coming to me. She gave a small, bitter smile. I already lost everything that mattered. Elias had spent his entire career calculating risk. It was how he'd built Vance Tech, reading markets, outmaneuvering competitors, seeing angles others missed. But no spreadsheet could measure this. A missing man. A waitress holding secrets. A note under a saucer. And now, a black SUV with tinted windows. He turned toward her fully. Maya, I need to know everything you know. Every plate number. Every van. Every face you can remember. I wrote it all down, she said. In a notebook. I've been keeping track for months. Why? Because if I ever disappeared, she said softly, I wanted someone to know where to start looking. Something in Elias twisted at that. This wasn't just a witness. This was someone who'd been living in fear so long it had turned into planning for her own vanishing. He looked out at the water again. $27 million. He'd thought this was about money. It wasn't. They stood and began to walk along the river. Slow, careful steps. Their breath mingled in the mist. Whatever they're doing, Maya said, it's inside your company. And if they know who you are, they won't let you just walk around asking questions. I can handle myself. She gave him a sideways look. You're not bulletproof. No, he said. But I don't scare easy. The sound of the river filled the space between them again. Above, distant city lights flickered like tired stars. When they reached the end of the walkway, Maya stopped. Her hands were shoved deep in her jacket pockets now, like she could hold herself together from the inside out. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. I've already made too much noise. He took a step closer, not threatening, just grounding. You did the right thing. I don't even know what right looks like anymore. It looks like this, Elias said. It looks like not being silent. She searched his face, trying to measure whether she'd just tied herself to a lifeline or an anchor. Tomorrow, she finally said. Same place, same time. I'll bring the notebook. He nodded. As Maya walked away into the dark, her hood pulled low, Elias watched until she disappeared around the bend. The mist clung to everything, light, pavement, even breath, and the river murmured its endless song. He didn't need to turn around to know someone was watching him. A dark shape lingered by the street where the SUV had passed earlier. One silhouette. Still. Observing. Elias straightened his coat collar, turned away, and started walking back toward the city lights. He didn't quicken his pace. He didn't let the watcher know they'd gotten under his skin. But in his pocket, his hand curled around the folded napkin. This wasn't just his company anymore. This was a war he hadn't seen coming. Maya didn't breathe easily until she'd cut through 2 alleys and taken the long route home, switching buses twice like she used to do when she thought someone was following her. By the time she reached her building, her hair was damp, her fingers numb. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and pressed her ear to the door before unlocking it. No sounds inside except the soft hum of the heater and the faint, rhythmic breathing of her daughter, asleep in the next room. She closed the door quietly and leaned back against it, exhaling everything she'd held in all night. She'd done it. She'd crossed the line. Tomorrow there would be no going back. Elias didn't return to his motel. Not immediately. He drove along the river, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road. No SUV. Not anymore. But he knew enough not to relax. He parked near an empty gas station, engine off, rain ticking on the roof like restless fingers. In the faint light of the dashboard, he pulled out the folded napkin again. River walk. 9 p.m. Don't bring anyone. Her words had been quiet, but they'd carried the kind of certainty born of survival. She'd trusted him, just enough to let him in. And that meant this wasn't just about saving a company. It was about saving her. Saving whoever Malik was. Stopping whoever thought they could bury him with silence. Elias tilted his head back against the seat, staring at the water streaming across the windshield. The war had started, and he was done being a ghost in his own empire. The parking lot of the motel was slick with rain, its puddles reflecting a crooked neon sign that blinked vacancy like a pulse. Elias Vance sat behind the wheel of the Ford, the engine off, the silence around him almost unnaturally thick. In his coat pocket, the folded napkin from Maya's meeting was slightly crumpled but intact, a small, damp proof that the world he thought he controlled had already spun beyond him. The motel itself was a long, sagging structure with faded yellow walls and peeling green paint. It smelled faintly of mildew even from outside. A neon light flickered over the reception window where a sleepy clerk barely looked up as Elias walked in, handed over cash, and signed a false name. Room 112. Around the side, the clerk muttered. The key, a real key, not a card, was attached to a chunk of red plastic shaped like a teardrop. Elias turned it in his hand as he walked down the cracked sidewalk toward his room. There was a hum of highway noise in the distance, but otherwise, the world felt eerily quiet. He hadn't checked into a place like this since his 20s. Back when money was something he begged for in meetings, not something people courted him to spend. Inside, the room was exactly what he expected. Dim, with faded curtains, 2 mismatched chairs, a bedspread patterned in tired florals, and the faint scent of cigarettes no cleaning crew could ever fully erase. He set his duffel down, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged under his weight. His world had never felt smaller. Boardroom problems were easy. He stared at the cracked plaster on the wall and let the thoughts settle like gravel in his chest. Boardrooms were controlled chaos. Power plays, money games, subtle knives hidden behind handshakes. He'd thrived there. Built there. But conspiracies. Real people vanishing? A waitress slipping him a note saying someone wanted him dead? That was something else entirely. This wasn't a negotiation with stakes measured in stock price. This was a game with no rulebook. And if Maya was right, if someone inside his company was moving something out of that facility, If her brother had disappeared because of it, then the people behind this weren't amateurs. He'd been at the top of the world too long. It had made him soft in ways he'd never admitted. The suits, the bodyguards, the clean offices, they created the illusion of control. And control was a fragile thing. Elias dragged a hand down his face and forced his mind to shift from shock to action. He pulled the burner phone from his pocket, a cheap prepaid model, and opened an encrypted contact list he'd memorized years ago. Back-channel people. Not the kind his board approved of, but the kind who got things done quietly. He made 3 calls. Each was brief. No names. Just numbers, times, favors owed. By midnight, his email inbox, an account known to only a handful of old allies, pinged with a set of credentials. Facility access logs. Security shift rosters. Shipping manifests. All scraped from inside his company's internal system. He stared at the files on the dim glow of his laptop screen, cross-legged on the motel bed with the cheap comforter pushed aside. Each line of data represented another piece of a puzzle that didn't belong. Between midnight and 4 a.m., every night for the past 3 weeks, there were undocumented access points logged at the St. Louis R&D gate. Same security clearance. Same door. Different vehicles. He zoomed in on the access badge ID. It belonged to someone he knew. Victor Calder. His CO. His oldest friend. The logs didn't say Victor Calder outright. Only a clearance ID he recognized instantly. He'd helped create the first generation of those IDs himself. Elias felt the floor of the room shift beneath him. Calder. Victor had been with him since the beginning. Since the two of them were working out of a shared office the size of a shoebox, eating takeout noodles at 3 a.m. and dreaming about saving the world through clean energy. Calder had been his right hand. His anchor. Why would his anchor be unlocking the gate at 3 in the morning? He closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard. Rain ticked against the window pane. His chest felt tight. You think anyone's going to buy this? Victor's voice had been light, teasing, but his hands were stained with grease from the prototype battery stack they'd built together. A younger Elias had looked up from the desk cluttered with sketches and late-night takeout containers. Someone will, Elias had said. Someone who's tired of oil companies choking the planet. Victor had grinned that big, stupid grin that made every impossible thing seem simple. Then let's build the thing that saves it. They'd shaken hands over a $5,000 prototype and a shared dream. For a long time, Elias had believed Victor was the one person he could trust without question. And now his name, his badge, was stamped on a ghost operation draining millions from the company. By dawn, Elias hadn't slept. His motel room felt like a war room. Printouts strewn across the desk, scribbled notes in the margins, coffee cups stacked like spent shells. Outside, the sky was the color of wet steel. He buttoned up his coat and left. If there were trucks moving out of the facility before sunrise, he needed to see them himself. The St. Louis facility sat on the edge of the riverfront, an enormous stretch of concrete and steel bordered by chain-link fences and security lights. Even at 6:15 a.m., the air around it hummed. Forklifts, distant machines, the clatter of early shift workers moving inside. Elias parked his car several blocks away, down an industrial side street where old warehouses leaned into one another like tired old men. From here, he had a clean line of sight to the rear loading gate. He'd memorized those gates. He'd walked through them hundreds of times during construction years ago, back when everything was transparent and bright and his company felt like something pure. At 6:43 a.m., the gate opened. A white box truck with no company logos rolled out. No markings. No visible plates from this angle. It turned east toward the river. Elias started the car and pulled out slowly, letting 2 delivery vans slide between them. He followed at a distance of 3 blocks. The rain had thinned to a mist, making the road slick and reflective. The truck moved with purpose, weaving through a part of the city that had long since fallen quiet. Abandoned factories, empty rail yards, forgotten infrastructure. Places no one paid attention to. It finally slowed in front of a squat red brick building on the far side of a decaying bridge. The sign above the door was a faded ghost. Merrick Textiles. The company had shut down 15 years ago. Elias cut the engine and waited. From the shadow of a loading bay across the street, he watched as two men climbed out of the truck. They didn't wear uniforms. One wore a black hoodie, the other a leather jacket. No one else was around. They didn't unload anything immediately. Instead, they walked to the rear door of the textile building, knocked twice, paused, then knocked again. The door opened from the inside. A third man appeared, face half hidden under a baseball cap. The door shut behind them. The truck disappeared inside a moment later. Elias stared at the now quiet warehouse and felt the weight of it settle in his gut. There was no legitimate reason for a Vance tech-linked truck to be here. No reason at all. Something in that building was feeding the financial bleed in his company. And if Victor Calder's clearance was opening those gates at night, it wasn't just theft. It was betrayal. He stayed parked there for nearly half an hour, watching the building, memorizing every movement. A single black SUV arrived 10 minutes later, idling with its lights off. Someone inside lit a cigarette, the red tip flaring briefly in the gray dawn. Elias didn't move. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have security. All he had was the truth unraveling thread by thread in front of him. Eventually, the SUV backed out and drove away. No trucks left the warehouse. Not yet. Elias started the car and left quietly, heart pounding hard in his chest. Back at the motel, the walls felt even closer than the night before. He paced the length of the room twice, then pulled out his burner phone. It was time to start connecting the dots in a way that would get him answers. He dialed an old number. The line clicked twice before a familiar voice answered. Jesus. Elias. It's 6 in the morning. Morning to you too, Sam. Samira Akhtar. Former investigative journalist. Now a private intelligence consultant who owed him a favor for keeping her name out of a legal mess 3 years ago. What did you do? She asked, instantly picking up the tension in his voice. Nothing yet, Elias said. But I need eyes on a warehouse. Merrick Textiles. East River District. I want to know everything. Leases, owners, shell companies, activity. Quietly. You're not calling about some new green battery launch, are you? No. I'm calling about something inside my company. Something bad. A pause. How bad? Bad enough someone left me a death threat. The silence on the line was thick. Then Samira exhaled. All right. Give me 24 hours. But if this gets messy, you're on your own. I've always been on my own, he said softly and hung up. He sat down on the edge of the bed again, staring at the note pinned to the cheap nightstand with a chipped pen. They know who you are. And someone wants you dead. He thought about Maya, her hands trembling, her brother vanishing. He thought about the black SUV on the Riverwalk. And he thought about Victor Calder. His best friend. His right hand. Unlocking the gates in the middle of the night. This wasn't just numbers anymore. The next hour was spent combing through old press releases, internal memos, and acquisition filings that Calder had signed off on over the past 2 years. A pattern started to emerge. Dummy subcontractors. Logistic arms routed through holding companies. All small enough to pass under a board's radar, but big enough to funnel millions through. Victor, what the hell did you do? Elias rubbed the back of his neck. He'd built this empire from nothing. Trusted the wrong man too easily. He thought back to that night in the early days, sitting with Victor in a crummy garage office, eating stale pizza, talking about how one day they'd change the world. It was Victor who had convinced him to scale up. Victor who pushed for logistics autonomy. Victor who sat beside him the day they went public, grinning like they'd conquered the future. Now that grin felt like a knife. By afternoon, the rain had finally stopped. A soft wind pressed against the thin motel curtains. Elias sat with a legal pad, scribbling the first loose outline of what he knew. $27 million missing in less than a year. Unauthorized access between midnight and 4 a.m. Trucks leaving the facility before dawn. Abandoned textile warehouse as drop site. Calder's clearance used for entry. Threat note delivered by Maya Brooks. It wasn't enough to go public. It wasn't enough to bring in the police. not with the board watching his every move and whoever was inside already knowing he was here. But it was enough to push forward. He looked up at the water stain on the ceiling and felt something settle inside him. Fear, yes. But beneath it, resolve. If this was war, he'd fight it on his own terms. He stretched out on the bed for the first time in 36 hours. The room creaked in the quiet. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. The burner phone rang. Elias jolted upright, heart thudding hard. No one except Samira had this number. He snatched the phone off the nightstand and pressed it to his ear. He didn't say anything. For 3 seconds, nothing. Just a low, steady breath on the other end of the line. Then a voice, distorted and cold, slid through the speaker. "You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong." Elias froze. "Walk away, Vance." Click. The line went dead. Elias stared at the black screen of the phone. His pulse hammered in his temples. They knew his name. Not John Marks, the alias on the motel register. Not a random traveler. Vance. He exhaled slowly. There was no more pretending this was just about stolen money. No more distance between the boardroom and the street. They were coming closer. He picked up the crumpled napkin, smoothing it flat on the desk with both hands. Maya had started something. And now so had he. The third-floor hallway smelled faintly of old paint and someone's burnt dinner. Maya Brooks climbed the creaky steps with her bag slung over her shoulder, her body aching from another double shift at Hazel's. Outside, rain drizzled against the cracked window, turning the city's neon signs into bleeding streaks of color on the glass. Inside her, the storm was louder. She paused outside her apartment door and scanned the hallway out of habit. The old woman from 3B had once joked that Maya had soldier eyes, always searching corners, always listening. That wasn't far from the truth. 4 months now, every creak of the floorboards, every unfamiliar shadow in the stairwell, made her pulse race a little faster. She inserted her key, turned the lock, and stepped into the one place in the world that still felt like hers. The apartment was barely 500 square feet, but it was warm. A single string of fairy lights framed the living room window, their soft glow spilling across a tiny second-hand couch. The walls were covered with thrift store art prints she'd collected piece by piece, small reminders that beauty could exist even when money didn't. Her textbooks were stacked in a neat tower on the coffee table. Forensic Accounting 201, highlighted in pink and yellow. It was supposed to be her way out. 3 nights a week she took online night classes after her diner shifts, logging into a battered old laptop on a wobbly card table. She'd always told herself, one day, I'll be more than a waitress. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about exams or the next semester's tuition. Tonight, she was thinking about Malik. Her brother's smile stared back at her from a framed photo on the bookshelf, his arm slung around her shoulder, both of them grinning like fools at a 4th of July fair 2 summers ago. He was her only family. Their mother had died when Maya was 15. Malik had practically raised her after that. He worked janitorial shifts at the Vance Tech facility across the street from Hazel's diner. It was supposed to be steady work. Good benefits. Safe. 3 weeks ago, Malik had texted her one last message. Vance needs to know. It's not batteries they're moving. And then, nothing. Maya locked the door behind her and dropped her bag on the chair. She moved to the corner of the living room where a thin rug covered a slightly raised floorboard. She crouched, peeled the rug back, and slid the board up with practiced fingers. Beneath it was a small metal tin, scratched and dented. Inside the tin was a notebook, spiral-bound, edges soft from months of handling. Every page was filled with rows of numbers, license plates, times, descriptions. It started as a weird curiosity. She'd noticed unmarked trucks at the back gate of Vance Tech when she'd wait for Malik's shift to end. Always late at night. Always the same pattern. No company logo. No shipping manifests. No explanations. She'd started writing them down because she'd grown up in a neighborhood where the police didn't listen unless you had proof. Now, the notebook had become something else entirely. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. 7 trucks last week. 6 the week before. always at odd hours. Sometimes Malik would walk her home, tired but tense, telling her about things he wasn't supposed to see. Then he vanished, and when she'd gone to the police, they told her to wait a few more days. When she called the plant's security desk, they said Malik had probably taken off. No one believed her. No one ever did. But the notebook didn't lie. She pressed the board back into place, smoothing the rug over it, just as her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The sound was sharp in the quiet. Unknown number. She frowned, wiped her palms on her jeans, and answered. Hello. Static crackled. Then a man's voice, a low, rasping whisper. We know what you've been writing down. Maya froze, every muscle tightening. Who is this? Burn it. All of it. Or you'll end up like your brother. Click. The line went dead. Her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The hum of the refrigerator sounded suddenly too loud, like it was pressing against her ears. She lowered the phone slowly, fingers tingling. They knew. Her first thought wasn't even about herself. It was about the notebook under the floorboard. About what would happen if they found it. About Malik. She crossed the room in 3 strides and locked the deadbolt again, even though she'd already done it. Then she pulled the curtains tighter, shutting out the pale orange glow of the streetlights. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still in the middle of the room, one hand over her mouth, listening. Outside, someone coughed. Not close. Maybe from the alley. But it was enough to make her chest tighten. She forced herself to breathe. She was not going to panic. Maya moved to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the cheap lighter she used for candles. Then she knelt down again, pulled the floorboard up, and stared at the notebook inside the tin. She could burn it. She could end it right now. Pretend she never saw anything. Go to work. Keep her head down. She could survive. That's what everyone always told her. Don't get involved. Mind your business. Survive. Her fingers brushed over the cover of the notebook. The edges were soft and warm from how often she'd handled it. Malik's neat handwriting filled a few of the later pages where he'd helped her cross-check some of the truck numbers with what little employee records she could get her hands on. She'd been doing this alone for months. No help. No protection. Until Elias Vance had walked into the diner and ordered tea. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even realized it. She pressed her lips together hard. Weakness wouldn't help now. On the wall above the small bookshelf was that photo of Malik. He was laughing, head tilted back, wearing the ridiculous red baseball cap she'd always teased him about. She stared at it until the edges of the world stopped spinning. I'm not letting them erase you, she whispered. Her grip tightened on the notebook. She wasn't Malik. She didn't work at the facility. She was just a waitress. No power. No backing. But she had the one thing they didn't expect her to have, evidence. She'd built it one night at a time after closing shifts, while her classmates studied accounting theory and she memorized license plates by streetlight. If she burned it, he'd be gone for good. They'd win. If she kept it, she'd paint a target on her own back. Maya sat at the small kitchen table, phone on the wood in front of her, the notebook beside it. Her stomach twisted with a familiar cocktail of fear and stubbornness. This wasn't the first time the world had tried to silence her. When their mother died, the system told her she was too young to be Malik's legal guardian. When their landlord tried to evict them at 16, no one believed her until she shoved their illegal lease into someone's face. When Malik disappeared, no cop thought a waitress could possibly know more than they did. She'd survived all of it. And this time she wasn't backing down. She grabbed her phone and called her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse who lived 1 floor below. It's Maya. Can you do me a favor? She whispered. Maya, what's wrong? You sound. Just, if you hear anything weird tonight, anything, call me, please. Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then said, Of course, baby. Maya ended the call, wiped her face, and took a shaky breath. She couldn't drag Mrs. Patterson into this. She couldn't drag anyone into this. But she needed at least one pair of eyes on the world if something went wrong. Hours bled by. She didn't sleep. Every time a car drove by, her head snapped toward the window. Every shadow in the alley looked like a figure. She kept the lights off, moving through her apartment like a ghost. At 2:14 a.m., a voicemail alert buzzed on her phone. She hadn't even heard it ring. With her heart hammering in her throat, she pressed play. A man's voice again. Same rasp. "We see you, Maya. We see your building." The message ended with a faint chuckle. Low. Ugly. She stared at the glowing phone screen, her hand shaking so hard she almost dropped it. The little red light on her answering machine blinked in the dark like an accusation. They were watching her. Maybe from a car outside. Maybe from the street corner. Maybe closer. She moved quietly to the living room window and peeled back the curtain an inch. Across the street, a dark SUV sat under a flickering street lamp. She couldn't see inside, just a vague outline behind the wheel. Her throat went dry. She thought about Elias. She thought about that note she'd handed him, about how his eyes had widened just slightly when he read it. She didn't know if he was a good man. She didn't know if she could trust him. But at least someone besides her finally knew something was wrong. And that meant the people behind all this knew it too. She returned to the notebook and opened it on the table. She ran her fingers over Malik's handwriting. She traced the number from the last truck he'd ever mentioned. She didn't know how deep this went, but she knew the kind of men who operated in the shadows. She'd seen it in the way Kevin, the diner manager, had started watching her lately. She'd seen it in the SUV on the Riverwalk when she met Elias. She wasn't trained for this kind of war. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't armed. But she was angry. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. Maya sat with her notebook open, the lighter still beside it. She forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Malik had always called her stubborn, said she was born with fire in her veins. Maybe that was all she had left now. She pulled the loose board back one more time and slid the notebook into the tin, sealing it away like a piece of herself she couldn't let go of. Then she pushed the floorboard back down and whispered into the empty room. They won't scare me off. The world outside remained dark, but something inside her had shifted. Fear hadn't disappeared, but it had hardened. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a witness. And soon, she'd be a problem for whoever thought they could make Malik vanish without consequence. She turned off her phone, shoved it under her pillow, and sat in the dark, her back against the wall. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel alone. Somewhere out there, Elias Vance, the billionaire she'd once only seen in a magazine, had a reason to fight too. And that meant this war wasn't hers alone anymore. Rain hammered the motel window like impatient fingers. Elias Vance leaned over the glow of his laptop, jaw clenched, eyes rimmed red from another sleepless night. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 2:37 a.m., its steady pulse the only sign of time moving forward. On the screen, rows and rows of shipping records. He'd pulled everything: freight logs, internal invoices, subcontractor manifests, customs filings, anything tied to the St. Louis R&D site. And buried among the legitimate supply chain routes and clean numbers was a name that kept surfacing like an oil slick rising from clear water. Calder Logistics. The first time he saw it, his chest tightened. The third time, he stopped pretending it was a coincidence. He opened one of the bills of lading. Origin: St. Louis. Destination: a string of small, obscure distribution depots in Illinois and Kentucky. The shipments were always marked as prototype component material, restricted, exempt from certain disclosures. On paper, everything was clean. But the company behind the movement was a private holding, tucked neatly into layers of shell entities. Calder Logistics. God damn it, Victor. Elias whispered into the stale motel air. He clicked deeper, pulling up incorporation records. The signatures were faint but unmistakable. He knew that handwriting as well as his own. Victor Calder. Victor, his CO. His partner. The man who had sat next to him 20 years ago in a cramped office, scribbling dreams on napkins. The man who pushed him to scale when he thought they couldn't. The man he'd trusted more than anyone else alive. For a moment, Elias couldn't move. He sat in the dim light, fingers hovering uselessly above the keyboard. His pulse roared in his ears, louder than the rain outside. Betrayal. It wasn't some stranger leeching his company from the shadows. It was the man who helped him build it. The memories came fast, sharp, unwelcome. Victor pouring whiskey into two mismatched mugs after they'd landed their first investor. Victor standing beside him on the factory floor during the grand opening, grinning wide like they'd just cracked open the future. Victor swearing, after a bad quarter, "It's you and me against the world, Eli. Always. Always." Elias shoved the chair back from the table, the screech against the tile harsh in the silence. He paced the room with both hands pressed against the back of his neck. If he exposed Calder, the board would turn on him. Half of them owed their positions to Victor's quiet influence. Calder was the architect of Vance's logistics empire, the man everyone trusted to keep the gears turning. Without proof strong enough to burn through that loyalty, the board would frame Elias as paranoid, unstable, a liability. But if he stayed silent, this conspiracy would keep feeding itself. More shipments. More silence. And Maya. Malik. They wouldn't stand a chance. Elias closed his eyes. He saw the waitress's trembling hands as she slid the note beneath the saucer. He saw the SUV at the Riverwalk. He heard that cold voice on the phone. "Walk away, Vance." This wasn't just business anymore. It was blood. He grabbed his coat and left the motel without bothering to turn off the light. The rain had soaked the streets into mirrors, reflecting the sodium glow of the city like shallow pools of fire. Hazel's diner sat at the corner, its windows fogged, the familiar neon sign humming in the dark. Elias parked across the street, watching for a long moment before stepping inside. The bell above the door jingled softly. It was too quiet for a weekday morning. Only two truckers sat at the far booth, muttering over cold coffee. Behind the counter stood Kelly, the other waitress. Her hair was tied up in a bun, her eyeliner slightly smudged. She glanced up at him and offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, stranger. Haven't seen you since." "What, yesterday?" Elias didn't waste time. "Where's Maya?" Kelly's smile faltered. She wiped her hands on her apron, stalling. She, called in sick. The words landed wrong. Too rehearsed. Too thin. Sick. Elias repeated quietly. Kelly bit her lip, glanced toward the back kitchen, then leaned in a little. "She never calls in sick." His gut turned to lead. Elias left cash on the counter without touching the tea she'd started to pour. Outside, the rain had turned to mist again, and his breath curled in front of him like smoke. He climbed into the Ford and sat there, fingers gripping the wheel, a cold knot forming in his chest. He didn't have a plan. He just had an address, one Maya had scribbled on a slip of paper during their meeting at the Riverwalk. 15 minutes later, he was standing in front of her building. The SUV wasn't outside anymore. The stairwell light flickered weakly as he climbed the stairs two at a time. The hallway smelled like damp wood and old radiator pipes. Her door was at the far end. The frame was splintered. The lock was hanging loose. Shit. He pushed the door open slowly, every instinct screaming at him to be careful. The apartment was dark except for the pale orange glow of a street lamp leaking through the window. The fairy lights she'd strung along the wall were off, a few broken bulbs hanging loose. The place wasn't trashed, just searched. With precision. A cushion on the floor. A chair tipped slightly. The rug peeled back from the corner. They'd known exactly where to look. Elias stepped inside carefully, boots soft against the creaky floorboards. His eyes flicked over every detail. The bookshelf had been touched. Dust marks where something had been lifted. The floorboard near the corner was cracked open slightly. The notebook. It was gone. He clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. The people behind this weren't just covering their tracks, they were 2 steps ahead. He moved deeper into the apartment, pausing at the far wall. Something was taped to it. A Polaroid. His stomach twisted as he stepped closer. The picture was grainy but clear enough to make his breath catch. A young man, Malik, sat in a chair, wrists bound with duct tape, a strip across his mouth. His head was turned slightly like he'd tried to look toward the camera at the last second. Beneath the image, scrawled in black marker, Friday 11:45 p.m. 2 nights from now. Elias's pulse slammed against his ribs. This wasn't an abstract threat anymore. This was a clock counting down. He stared at Malik's eyes in the photo. Wide, terrified, alive. He imagined Maya walking into this room, finding her hiding spot torn open, her brother's face pinned to the wall like a warning. No wonder she hadn't shown up. She was either in hiding, or they'd already gotten to her. He stepped back and scanned the room again. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, but the quiet was unnerving. A woman who'd been terrified for weeks wouldn't leave willingly. Someone had come for her. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed Samira's number with shaking fingers. She picked up on the second ring, her voice rough with sleep. Elias. Jesus. Do you know what time it is? I found her apartment, he said, his voice low, clipped. The door's been broken. The notebook's gone. And I've got a Polaroid of her brother tied up like a hostage. They've got him, Samira. Silence. Then a quiet, shit. Friday night. 11:45. Elias. What are you walking into? He looked around at the torn floorboard, the stripped bookshelf, the empty air. Something I can't walk away from. Samira's voice sharpened. You need to bring in law enforcement. And hand it to the same system that ignored Malik's disappearance for 3 weeks? His laugh was humorless. No, they're already in too deep. This is inside my company, Samira. It's Calder. A beat. Victor Calder. Elias closed his eyes. Calder Logistics. He's the shell. Jesus Christ. Yeah. Samira exhaled on the other end of the line. Elias, this isn't some boardroom coup. This is a smuggling ring tied to your name. If he's behind it, then the people working with him aren't small-timers. You don't get to play lone wolf. I'm not playing anything, Elias said. I'm making sure a young woman doesn't end up like her brother. He hung up before she could argue. The photo was still on the wall. He pulled it down, careful not to smudge the ink. He slipped it into his coat pocket and stared at the apartment one last time. Rain tapped gently against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a door creaked. He locked the apartment behind him. As he stepped back into the night, Elias felt something cold and old settle in his chest. It wasn't panic anymore. It was something steadier. A grim kind of clarity. Victor Calder had betrayed him. Not just his company. Him. And the cost of that betrayal was a waitress living in fear, a young man held somewhere against his will, and an empire rotting from the inside. The streetlight flickered as he walked toward the car. The Polaroid burned hot against his chest pocket, as if Malik's eyes were staring through the fabric, begging him not to waste the time they didn't have. Friday. 11:45 p.m. The clock was already ticking. He drove without music, the city passing by in smears of rain and neon. His reflection in the windshield looked older than he remembered. More haunted, less untouchable. The billionaire who once thought he could solve anything with leverage and spreadsheets was gone. What remained was a man with too much to lose and not enough people left to trust. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was going to find Maya. He was going to find Malik. And Victor Calder was going to look him in the eye when it all burned down. The night air was cold enough to bite. St. Louis hummed faintly in the distance, all neon and glass, but here, on a quiet residential block just east of the diner, it felt like a different world. Elias Vance stood at the edge of the cracked sidewalk, staring at the small row house where a faint basement light flickered behind curtained windows. He'd followed a thread of whispered directions, one worried neighbor, a landlord who'd said she ain't been right since those men came, and finally Mrs. Patterson, who'd looked him dead in the eye and said, "If you're here to hurt her, billionaire or not, I'll bury you myself." Then she told him where Maya was hiding. Elias walked to the back steps, heart pounding harder than it had in any boardroom showdown. He crouched to the basement window, the sound of the rain softening against the old shingles, and knocked twice. A voice whispered sharply from inside. "Who is it?" "It's Elias Vance." Silence. Then a sound like furniture scraping. The door creaked open an inch, chain still fastened. Her face appeared in the gap, pale in the dim light, curls escaping from her scarf, eyes wide but burning with a fire he hadn't expected to see after everything that had happened. "Don't come closer," she said. The tremor in her voice wasn't fear. It was control barely holding. Elias raised both hands slowly. "Maya, I'm not here to hurt you. You shouldn't be here at all." "I know," he admitted. "But I couldn't let you disappear too." Something in his voice softened the air between them. The chain slid loose. She opened the door. The basement smelled faintly of old carpet and mothballs. A single lamp cast long shadows across the walls. An old recliner sat near a heater, and a pile of blankets was folded neatly against the wall. It wasn't much, but it was warm. Maya closed the door behind him and locked it. Her hands were shaking. Elias took in the little details: the stack of textbooks on the chair, the crumpled napkin from Hazel's diner on the end table, the damp shoes by the heater. She'd been here for hours. Maybe longer. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "I went to your apartment," he said. The door was broken. The notebooks gone. Her throat bobbed. "Yeah, I figured." He reached into his coat and carefully pulled out the Polaroid he'd found taped to her wall. Malik's terrified eyes stared out at both of them. Maya's hand went to her mouth, a small sound escaping before she could stop it. She staggered a step backward, bracing herself against the wall. "They have him," she whispered. Elias nodded. Friday, 11:45 p.m. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind against the basement windows and the hum of the old heater. "I almost ran," she said finally. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I almost packed up and left the city last night. I kept telling myself I'm just a waitress, just a nobody. But then I thought about Malik, and the notebook, and that SUV, and," she stopped, "they'd win if I disappeared." Elias stepped closer but slowly, like approaching a wild animal that had been hurt too many times. "Maya," he said softly, "you're not a nobody." She laughed once. Short, bitter. "I'm not a billionaire either." "No," he said, "but you're the only one who did something while everyone else looked away. That counts more." Her eyes lifted to his, searching for a catch. For the rich man's smirk. It never came. She moved to the chair and sat down heavily, rubbing her hands together. "Do you even get what's happening here? This isn't a bad balance sheet or some stock thing. These people are dangerous. They've been following me. They took Malik." "I know," Elias said quietly. "I got a call 2 nights ago. Someone telling me to walk away." She frowned. "And you didn't." He shook his head. "No." She stared at him, as if trying to figure out what kind of man walks into a fire when he has every door in the world open to him. "Why?" she finally asked. He sat down on the edge of the old recliner across from her. "Because I built this company to fight people like them. To keep lobby money and dirty deals out of clean energy. I thought I'd won that war. Turns out they were already inside the walls." Maya's hands stilled. "I spent years thinking money and power could keep the rot out," Elias continued. "But it just built a bigger door for it to walk through. And now someone I trusted more than anyone, my COO, Victor Calder, is at the center of it." Her eyes widened. "Your friend. My brother in everything but blood." She was silent for a long moment. "That's a different kind of knife." "It is." Maya leaned forward, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the floor. "You know, people like me don't get chances. My mom worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. Malik and I didn't get trust funds or safety nets. So I decided I'd make my own way out." Elias listened. He didn't interrupt. "I started taking night classes in forensic accounting. Figured if I couldn't fight people like Calder with money, maybe I could fight them with numbers. With proof. It was supposed to be my way out of Hazel's diner." She let out a humorless laugh. "And then Malik disappeared. And you kept digging anyway," Elias said. "Because if I didn't, no one would." For the first time since he'd stepped into that basement, she didn't look like she was just surviving. She looked like someone choosing to stay. Elias leaned forward. "I can't promise to fix the world, Maya. But I can promise I won't let you fight this alone." She met his gaze, steady and sharp. "That's a big promise." "It's not a boardroom promise," he said. "It's a man's promise." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that isn't empty but thick with everything unsaid. The heater clicked softly. Rain tapped against the window. Somewhere above them, Mrs. Patterson's TV droned faintly. Then Elias straightened. His mind was already shifting from emotion to strategy. "We have 2 days," he said. "Friday at 11:45 p.m. That's when they plan to move him, or worse." Maya nodded slowly. "That's when the trucks leave. I've logged them for months. Friday nights, always around midnight. They don't stick around long." "Then we hit them at the source," Elias said. "Inside the facility." She blinked. "What?" "I still have old clearance codes," he said. "And there's a security access point no one uses anymore. If I get inside before they load the trucks, I can see exactly what they're moving and where they're keeping Malik." Not we." Elias gave a wry smile. "I wasn't planning on dragging a waitress into a smuggling ring." Her chin lifted. "I'm already in it. You think they broke into my apartment for fun? If we're doing this, we're doing it together." He wanted to argue. He didn't. Because deep down, he knew she was right. Maya stood and crossed to the corner, digging through a small box near the heater. She pulled out an old cell phone wrapped in a plastic bag. "What's that?" She hesitated. "A favor I've been saving." She turned the phone on, scrolling through contacts. "There's a customer who's come into the diner every Friday for the last 3 years. Quiet guy. Off-duty federal agent. He always sits at the counter. Black coffee, no sugar, blueberry muffin. I don't know his name, but I know his face. And I know he gave me this number once, said if I ever felt unsafe to call." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Federal agent." She nodded. "He won't look the other way." Maya pressed the phone to her ear, heart hammering loud enough she could feel it in her fingertips. 1 ring. 2. 3. "Yeah," a rough voice answered. "It's Maya," she said, her voice shaking slightly. There was a pause on the line. "Where are you?" She exhaled. "Safe. For now." "What happened?" "I can't explain everything over the phone. But someone's been using the Vance Tech plant to move something. And they've taken my brother." Another pause. Then, "Tell me when and where." Maya looked at Elias. He gave her a small nod. "Friday night," she said. "Riverfront. Just before midnight." "Understood," the agent said. "Maya, don't do anything stupid." She hung up, hands still trembling. "He'll come." Elias leaned back against the wall, the smallest thread of something like hope threading through the heaviness in his chest. She'd risked everything to collect that notebook. She'd risked more to stay. And now, somehow, they weren't just 2 people caught in the same storm. They were an alliance. A fragile one. But real. "You ever think," Maya said suddenly, "that the world just picks the wrong people to win?" Elias's smile was tired. "Every day." She tilted her head. "Then why build an empire at all?" He met her gaze. "Because I thought if I built it right, I could change the rules." "Did you?" He hesitated. "Not enough." She crossed her arms. "Then let's start now." Something in his chest shifted at that. Not the old polished confidence of a CEO, but something rawer. He extended his hand to her. She stared at it for a second, then took it. As the rain outside slowed to a soft drizzle, the basement filled with the quiet hum of 2 people who had decided, in their own way, to stop running. Maya was no longer just the waitress who slipped him a note. And Elias was no longer just the billionaire with everything to lose. They were allies. And in 48 hours they would walk into his facility. Not as employee and stranger, but as people who refused to let a man like Victor Calder win. Friday night had a way of holding its breath. The neon lights outside Hazel's diner flickered lazily against the wet pavement, the steady hum of the rain making the world feel both slow and sharp at the same time. Inside, the place was warm and crowded, exactly how it always was at this hour. Truckers hunched over coffee. Students hovered over laptops. A couple argued quietly in the corner booth. And behind the counter, wearing her faded black apron and her carefully built mask, Maya Brooks poured refills and smiled like her world wasn't about to explode. She'd practiced that smile in the mirror for years, back when she had to keep her head down just to survive. But tonight, it wasn't just camouflage. It was armor. She carried a tray of blueberry muffins past the man in the booth by the window. The off-duty federal agent, the one who'd always ordered black coffee, didn't look at her, but she saw the subtle shift of his hand against the mug. A signal. He was here. Everything was in motion. 3 blocks away, the back service gate of the VanceTech St. Louis facility creaked softly as Elias Vance pressed his borrowed keycard to the old reader. The small green light blinked to life, and the gate slid open with a whisper. The wind off the river was cold and heavy with the smell of steel. Elias moved like someone who had walked these corridors 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with his pulse hammering in his throat. He wore a maintenance uniform 2 sizes too big, its patch ripped off, cap pulled low. A small recording device was clipped inside his jacket, blinking red beneath the fabric. He'd built this facility, designed every inch of it, knew where the guards rotated, where the old service tunnels connected to the loading bays, where the cameras had blind spots, back when security was designed to protect his vision. Now it was being used to hide a crime. As he slipped through a service door near the eastern wall, a wave of machine noise rolled over him. Forklifts, crates clanking, truck engines rumbling. The operation was already underway. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous, the high beams stretching into shadow. Rows of pallets were stacked high with matte silver cases stamped with technical serials. But Elias recognized the shape of them instantly. Lithium cells. High capacity, military grade, the kind used for defense contracts and experimental energy grids. Worth millions on the open market. Billions if funneled to the right buyers. At the far end of the loading bay, Victor Calder stood in a tailored coat, talking to 3 men dressed like security contractors. He didn't look like a man caught in the act. He looked like the CEO Elias had trusted for half his life. Calm, calculating, in control. Load them evenly, Calder said. The buyers don't want delays. Once this shipment's gone, it doesn't come back. Elias crouched behind a stack of crates, breath tight, recording every word. He'd once toasted with this man after their first IPO. Stood next to him at board meetings, laughing about the future. Now he watched him move lithium cells like stolen candy bars. A man in a black jacket approached Calder. "You sure about the girl? She's still breathing." Calder didn't even flinch. "She's already made herself a problem. Once this shipment's gone, we're not leaving witnesses behind." Elias's stomach turned to ice. Not leaving witnesses. The words echoed like a gunshot inside his skull. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about cleaning house. Maya was on that list. Maybe Malik too. "Keep her alive until the trucks clear the gate," Calder continued. "Then tie off loose ends." Elias clenched his fists so hard his knuckles cracked. He forced himself to stay silent, to let the mic pick up every word. The moment he stepped out now, he'd blow the only chance at exposing this entire operation. He needed the trucks. He needed the faces. He needed proof. But most of all, he needed time. Back at Hazel's diner, Maya wiped down the counter as if nothing had changed. She could feel the agent's presence near the end booth. His coffee was untouched, his eyes fixed on the front window. They'd planned it with as few words as possible. She'd hit the panic signal when she saw the trucks roll out. He'd handle the rest. A couple of teenagers laughed near the jukebox. A delivery driver flirted with Kelly. The hum of life went on, unaware of the storm brewing just down the road. Then Maya's phone buzzed. Just once. A simple notification. Signal received. Elias was inside. She forced herself to breathe slow. The night was only just beginning. Inside the facility, Elias adjusted his position as two guards walked past the aisle of crates, talking casually. Their rifles were slung low, not factory security, mercenary muscle. Calder's operation ran deeper than he'd feared. He followed their line of sight. 3 white box trucks, each already half-loaded, engines idling. Workers in dark jackets moved in a rhythm too smooth to be improvised. This wasn't their first run. A guard radio crackled. Truck 1 ready to roll in 5. Calder nodded to one of his men. Make sure the last containers are sealed. This is the big one. The big one. Elias felt the shape of the night lock into place. Whatever Calder was planning, this shipment wasn't just another theft, it was the endgame. Maya turned toward the diner's kitchen, keeping her back to the window. Her hand slid under the counter, fingers finding the panic alarm installed earlier that day. Wired directly to the federal contact sitting in the booth. One soft press. No sound. No lights. Just a signal sent. Her thumb hovered. She thought about Malik's smile. About the Polaroid. About the way Elias had promised, not as a billionaire, but as a man, that they'd stop this. She pressed it. The agent's head lifted slightly. No one else noticed. At the facility, Elias shifted closer, moving down the catwalk that overlooked the loading bay. The recording device inside his jacket blinked steadily. He could hear Calder's voice clearly now. This is it. By the time the feds even look at our books, we'll be gone. Cayman accounts, offshore buyers, no trails. One of the men laughed. And the CEO? Calder smirked. Vance is a ghost. Doesn't even know what's happening in his own house. By the time he figures it out, it'll be over. Elias's hands curled into fists. A loud clang echoed through the warehouse. One of the guards turned sharply, flashlight sweeping the shadows. Elias froze. The beam hovered inches from his face, then moved on. He exhaled silently. Trucks are ready, someone called. Calder stepped forward, pulling out a sleek tablet, signing off on digital manifests. His men began shouting orders as engines revved louder. Elias pressed closer, tucking behind a metal column, watching. That's when the guard from the far end turned and looked straight at him. Their eyes locked. The guard's hand went for his weapon. Hey, he barked. Elias bolted sideways as the first shot rang out. The gunshot shattered a window high on the east wall, glass raining down like ice. Shouts exploded across the warehouse floor. Workers scattered. Calder spun around, face twisting from cold control to furious recognition. Find him, he roared. Now. Elias dove behind a stack of crates, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the ringing in his ears. He hit the floor hard, shoulder catching the corner of a pallet. Pain shot through his arm. Above the chaos, he heard the trucks roar louder. Someone was accelerating the schedule. They're moving now. Back at Hazel's, the agent stood abruptly, tossing a few bills on the table. Stay here, he told Maya quietly. She grabbed his arm. They'll kill him. He looked at her, something sharp and human flickering beneath his calm. Not if I get there first. He pushed through the door into the rain, jacket collar up, disappearing into the dark. Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. For the first time, she wasn't just scared. She was furious. This was her brother. Her home. Her fight. She grabbed her phone and followed him out into the storm. Inside the warehouse, shouts echoed like thunder. Elias crawled low between pallets as boots pounded past. Someone yelled into a radio. Intruder in the bay. Repeat, intruder in the bay. He pressed himself flat against the cold concrete floor. The trucks were moving. 2 were already rolling toward the exit gate. If they made it out, they'd vanish into the maze of distribution routes Calder had built. He needed proof, but he also needed to live long enough to use it. Another guard appeared around the corner, weapon drawn. Elias reached for a loose length of rebar leaning against the wall, something left over from construction. The man stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Elias swung hard. The rebar caught the guard's wrist, sending the gun clattering to the ground. The man stumbled back with a curse. Elias didn't wait. He ran. Calder's voice boomed through the chaos. "Shoot if you have to. I want him dead." The first truck rolled out of the gate. The second lurched forward. The third idled, its back doors still open, crates half-loaded. Calder turned to his men. "Get it moving." Elias reached for the small mic on his collar and whispered, "Samira, it's live. Get this to the feds. Now." Miles away, Samira's encrypted connection recorded every word. The off-duty agent's SUV screeched around the corner as the trucks hit the road. He grabbed his radio. "This is Agent Keller. We've got eyes on the target. Calling it in." Back inside, the gunfire started again. Elias ducked behind another row of crates as bullets bit into the wood inches from his head. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. He forced himself to breathe. Slow. Controlled. This wasn't a boardroom fight. There were no lawyers. No PR teams. This was war. From the open truck bay, Calder shouted to his men, "Seal the floor. No one leaves this building." Elias crouched behind the crates, rain leaking in through the shattered window above, his chest heaving. In that moment, everything narrowed to a single thought. Get out alive. Get the proof out. Save Maya and Malik. Another shout. Footsteps closing in. He reached for the fallen guard's gun, checked the chamber the way his security trainers had shown him years ago, and steadied himself. A second later, a flashlight beam cut across the aisle, landing directly on him. Elias exhaled. No choice now. He fired once. The light went out. Gunfire cracked the night wide open. The warehouse floor was a storm of sound and motion. Boots pounding, trucks screeching, men shouting orders over the roar of engines. Rain fell through the shattered windows like a fine mist, catching the white glare of floodlights as sirens began to wail in the distance. Elias Vance crouched behind a crate, breath ragged, gun clenched in a hand slick with sweat and blood. A bullet had grazed his shoulder minutes earlier. It burned like fire, but he pushed the pain aside. He could hear Calder barking orders from somewhere near the loading bay. Get the last van out. Don't wait for them to catch up. The rhythm of the night was unraveling. They'd planned a clean getaway. They weren't getting one. Another round of gunfire echoed across the warehouse, followed by the metallic groan of a gate being rammed open. Outside, red and blue lights exploded across the rain-slick pavement. The feds were here. At the far end of the lot, the first truck swerved as federal SUVs blocked its exit. Agents in tactical gear poured out like a flood, weapons drawn, voices hard and sharp. Federal agents. Drop your weapons. On the ground now. The men in black jackets scattered like startled crows. Some fired back. Others ran. Sirens wailed closer, louder, reinforcements. Elias rose from behind the crate and moved fast through the chaos. If Calder got out in that last van, everything, the evidence, the operation, justice, would vanish into the night. Maya Brooks sprinted across the diner parking lot, rain plastering her curls to her forehead. She'd ignored the agent's warning to stay put the second she heard the sirens wailing from the direction of the facility. Her lungs burned. Her sneakers slapped the pavement as she rounded the corner and saw the facility's gate lit up like a war zone. Federal SUVs surrounded the loading docks. Floodlights sliced through the storm. Gunfire popped like distant fireworks. "God," she whispered, hand gripping the fence. She climbed through a gap in the chain link, ducking behind a stack of barrels. Her heart was beating so hard it felt like it might split her chest open. Somewhere inside, Elias was fighting. And somewhere else, her brother was either alive or already gone. She didn't have the luxury of fear anymore. Elias spotted Calder near the van. His former CO's tailored coat was soaked through, hair plastered against his forehead, but his posture was the same as it always had been in the boardroom, straight, cold, commanding. "Move." Calder barked at the driver. "We're leaving." Elias moved down the catwalk, gun still warm in his hand, cutting through the noise and panic. One of Calder's men spotted him and raised his weapon. Elias fired first. The man dropped. He didn't have time to feel the weight of it. Calder turned. And for the first time, their eyes met through the storm. recognition, shock, and then anger. Eli. The single word was almost a snarl. Elias dropped down from the catwalk, landing hard on the concrete floor, shoulders screaming in protest. He didn't care. "You're not going anywhere," Elias said. Calder gave a bitter laugh. "You should have walked away. You should have remembered who built this company." "I did." Calder gestured to the van behind him. "That's why it's still standing. By selling it out. By making it unstoppable." Calder snapped, stepping forward. "You built an empire with clean hands, Eli. I made sure it stayed alive when the vultures came for it. You don't get to stay clean and keep the crown. Someone had to get their hands dirty." Elias's jaw clenched. Rain slid down his face, stinging the cut at his temple. "You didn't save the company, Victor." Calder's smile was cold and sharp. "Oh, I saved it." Elias raised the gun. "You sold its soul." The federal agents breached the main doors behind them, shouting commands. Calder didn't flinch. He lunged forward, knocking Elias's arm aside. The gun went off, once, twice. Bullets slamming into the ceiling. Calder tackled him hard, and they went down against the wet concrete floor. For a moment, it wasn't CEO versus COO. It was two men who'd built something together and then ripped it apart with their own hands. Calder's fist cracked against Elias's jaw. Elias spat blood, grabbed Calder's collar, and slammed him back against the hood of the van. Years of boardroom diplomacy burned away in an instant. "You're done, Victor." Elias roared. "No," Calder hissed back. "You are." He swung again. Elias ducked, caught him around the ribs, and drove him sideways. The two of them crashed into a pallet of crates. Lithium cells clattered to the floor like scattered silver bricks. Maya reached the loading dock just in time to see Elias and Calder locked in a brutal fight, rain hammering down on them as sirens blared. Her breath caught. For a second, Elias looked like he might collapse, but then he surged forward with a guttural shout, slamming Calder's arm against the van door until something cracked. Calder cried out. Elias yanked him backward, pressing him hard against the hood. "This ends now." Federal agents. "Drop it." The off-duty agent, Keller, stood at the edge of the bay, his weapon leveled at Calder. Behind him, a squad of armed agents flooded in, taking positions. The remaining mercenaries were either cuffed on the pavement or sprawled where they'd fallen. Calder didn't move. He looked around at the sea of red and blue flashing lights, the barrels, the agents, Elias standing over him like judgment itself. And for a brief second, he almost smiled. "If you think this ends with me, you're wrong." "Maybe," Elias said, breath ragged. "But it starts with you." Keller stepped forward. "Victor Calder, you're under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking, and corporate fraud. Hands where I can see them." Calder's cold eyes flicked once toward Elias, something like bitter pride in his expression. Then he raised his hands. Cuffs clicked shut. Maya didn't wait. She pushed past two agents and rushed toward the shipping yard behind the warehouse. Her heart knew where to go, the third truck. A federal agent was already there, prying open one of the shipping containers. The metal door groaned, then swung wide. A single floodlight cut through the dark interior. "Over here," someone called. Inside, Malik Brooks sat slumped against the wall, wrists bound, a strip of duct tape across his mouth. His head jerked up at the sound of her voice. "Malik." Maya's knees hit the wet pavement as she scrambled to him. She ripped the tape off and threw her arms around him, the sob tearing out of her throat before she could stop it. He coughed, voice hoarse. "You shouldn't be here." "You're my brother," she whispered fiercely. "I'm exactly where I should be." Two agents stepped forward, cutting the zip ties from his wrists. He sagged against Maya's shoulder, weak but alive. Alive. On the other side of the lot, Elias leaned against the side of the van, shoulder bleeding, jaw throbbing, lungs burning. The adrenaline was finally starting to wear off, and everything ached. Floodlights cut the night into harsh slices of white. Agents swarmed the scene, cuffing Calder's men, collecting evidence, cataloging the crates of lithium cells. The operation that had been rotting his company from the inside for months was now in chains on the wet pavement. Samira's car pulled up near the cordon. She caught Elias's eye and gave him a small nod, the kind of nod that meant, "We got everything." The recording had worked. Calder had damned himself with his own voice. Maya and Malik emerged from the container, flanked by agents. Malik was pale but walking. His arm looped around Maya's shoulder. She spotted Elias standing alone by the van, soaked to the bone, and for the first time in weeks, her fear broke into something else, relief. She walked toward him, her brother steadying himself on her. Elias straightened as they approached. His face was smeared with blood and rain. His eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But when he saw her, something in him softened. "You found him," he said. She nodded, voice breaking. "You stopped them." "We stopped them," he corrected. Keller walked past, Calder in cuffs between two agents. Calder paused just long enough to look at Elias. No apology, no regret, just that same cold ambition that had once made him invaluable. "Still think you can keep your hands clean?" Calder muttered. Elias met his gaze steadily. "I'll live with clean hands. You'll live behind bars." Calder smirked faintly as he was shoved into the back of a black SUV. Cameras flashed from the far end of the cordoned-off lot. News crews had arrived faster than Elias had hoped, helicopters hovering overhead, lenses capturing the image of a billionaire CEO standing under floodlights, shirt torn, blood on his sleeve, and his COO being shoved into a federal vehicle. He could already imagine the headlines. Billionaire exposes criminal empire inside own company. Undercover CEO brings down smuggling ring. But none of that mattered in this moment. Not the headlines. Not the board. Not the empire. What mattered was Maya hugging Malik like she'd never let go again. What mattered was Calder in cuffs. What mattered was that, for the first time in months, Elias could breathe. An agent approached him. "Mr. Vance, EMS is on its way. We need to get that shoulder checked." Elias exhaled. The pain was catching up to him now, slow and deep. "Yeah. Fine." As the medics worked on him near the van, Keller walked up beside him. "You know," he said, "when she called me about this, I thought it was a tip about a bad manager stealing tip money. Not this." Elias managed a small, tired laugh. "Welcome to Vance Tech." Keller looked over at Maya and Malik, then back to him. "You've got a hell of an ally in her." Elias nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know." Maya approached, Malik wrapped in a blanket, shivering but alive. She knelt next to Elias as the medic taped a fresh bandage over his shoulder. The rain had eased to a soft drizzle, the kind that felt more like breathing than a storm. "You're hurt," she said softly. "I've had worse," he lied. She stared at him for a long moment, taking in the man she'd once only seen on magazine covers, a man who'd walked straight into hell for a company he built and a girl who'd slipped him a note. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias looked at Malik, at Maya, at the flashing lights painting the wet asphalt red and blue. "You don't thank someone for doing the right thing," he said quietly. "You just make sure it mattered." Keller barked more orders, and agents began clearing the scene. The trucks were impounded. The lithium cells were secured. Calder was gone. And for the first time since this nightmare started, the storm had cracked open into something resembling dawn. Maya took her brother's hand. Elias pushed himself to his feet, his bandaged shoulder throbbing with every heartbeat. But he stood tall. They didn't win everything tonight, but they'd won enough. And sometimes, that's where revolutions begin. The diner looked different in the quiet. No sirens. No gunfire. No storm tearing the night apart. Just the faint sound of an espresso machine steaming milk, chairs scraping lightly against tile, and the rhythmic hum of a city waking up. 1 week had passed since the night everything burned down and came back together, and Hazel's Diner, of all places, felt like the only corner of St. Louis untouched by the chaos. Elias Vance sat at his usual corner table, the same one where a folded note had changed everything. Steam curled up from his cup of Earl Grey tea, blurring the reflection of the morning light spilling through the windows. He traced the rim of the cup with a thumb, as if still expecting to find another note tucked underneath. His shoulder was wrapped in clean bandages now, the wound knitting together beneath the ache. But the bruise in his chest, the one Calder left behind, would take longer to heal. Vance Tech was no longer the same company. Federal agents still swarmed the R&D facility, keeping it under lock and key while prosecutors built a case that would stretch far beyond Victor Calder. The smuggling network had roots reaching into half a dozen shell corporations, several board-linked entities, and a political donor list that would make Congress twitch. The media storm had been relentless. Headlines screamed across the country. Billionaire CEO goes undercover, exposes crime ring in his own company. From boardroom to battlefield, Elias Vance's night of reckoning. The waitress, the note, and the billion-dollar betrayal. Board members were already scrambling to distance themselves from Calder, pretending they hadn't shared golf games, private jets, or whispered deals. His general counsel had advised Elias to say nothing, smile at cameras, and stay above the fray. He hadn't smiled once. Maya Brooks, on the other hand, had found herself at the center of a storm she never asked for. Within 48 hours, federal investigators had whisked her to a safe house. She'd testified in front of a small task force with shaking hands and a steady voice, laying out the months of notes she'd kept hidden under her floorboard. Her testimony was the spine of the entire case. Malik was recovering in the hospital. Dehydrated, bruised, but alive. The doctors said it would take time, but the damage was physical, not permanent. That mattered more than anything else. Elias leaned back in the diner booth, watching rain bead softly on the window. A week ago, the same rain had blurred sirens and gunfire. Now it was just rain. The bell above the door jingled. Maya stepped in. She wasn't in her waitress uniform anymore. No black slacks, no red apron, no name tag she'd worn like armor. Instead, she wore dark jeans, a soft gray hoodie, and sneakers. Her hair was loose today, still damp from the drizzle, curls framing her face. For a moment, Elias thought about the first time he saw her. How she'd stood with trembling hands and a folded note. Now, she moved with quiet strength. She'd looked fear in the eye and hadn't backed down. "You're early," she said with a small smile, sliding into the booth across from him. "I never sleep much these days," Elias replied. "Trauma will do that." He huffed a quiet laugh. "That it will." The waitress on shift, a woman Maya had trained months ago, came by and set a mug of coffee in front of Maya, tea for Elias. "On the house," she said softly, like someone who knew a story had been written here. When she left, Maya drummed her fingers lightly against the mug. "Malik's moving out of the hospital next week. They're transferring him to rehab. Physically, he's strong. Mentally." She exhaled. "He's got a long road." Elias nodded. "You both do." She studied him for a moment. "And you? What happens to billionaires after they take down their best friend on national TV?" "Endless board meetings, lawyers, and PR damage control," he said dryly. "And a few sleepless nights." "Sounds glamorous." "It isn't." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and slid a cream-colored envelope across the table. Maya frowned. "What's this?" "Open it." She hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a thick folded letter, 2 documents, and something that made her eyes widen. A scholarship certificate from Vance Tech Foundation and a formal job offer from the company's internal audit division. Maya blinked. I don't understand." Elias rested his forearms on the table. "You spent months building a paper trail when no one else cared. You saw what my company had become long before I was willing to look. You didn't have power or protection, or even the certainty that anyone would believe you. And you still did the right thing." Her fingers tightened on the paper. "Elias." "You changed the story," he said quietly. "You didn't just save Malik. You saved me from my own damn blind spot." Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes, but Maya blinked them back. "I'm not a corporate type." "No," Elias said. "You're better." For a long moment, the diner was just quiet. The hum of the coffee machine. The low chatter from a couple of customers. The soft patter of rain. Maya set the letter down carefully. "What if I mess it up?" "You won't," Elias said simply. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember that you walked into a storm with nothing but a folded note. That kind of courage isn't something I can buy. Her lips curved slowly upward, not in the forced polite smile of a waitress serving customers, but in something genuine, something earned. Across town, Calder sat behind bulletproof glass, waiting for trial. Prosecutors were circling him like hawks. Every file, every recorded call, every shell company he'd used was unraveling in federal hands. He'd made the company unstoppable. Now he was the one who couldn't move. In the boardroom, the power dynamics had shifted. For years, Elias had felt like a man surrounded by shadows wearing expensive suits. Now those shadows were shrinking under fluorescent lights and federal subpoenas. No one wanted to be the next Victor Calder. And for the first time in a very long time, Elias didn't feel like he was fighting alone. Earl Grey. Maya asked after a beat, tilting her head toward his cup. Elias smiled faintly. Always. She took a sip of her coffee, then leaned back in the booth. You know, I always thought rich people like you lived in another world. We do, Elias admitted. And most of us never look out the window. And now, he watched the rain slide down the glass. Now I think I like the view out here better. Malik's recovery brought him slowly back to himself. The agents assured Maya and Elias that the network's local players were finished. There would be hearings, depositions, months of legal noise. But the storm itself had broken. And in its wake, quiet beginnings. Maya started work part-time at Vance Tech's audit division, taking evening classes on a full scholarship. The same sharp mind that had built her secret notebook of truck logs now dug through spreadsheets and contracts like a scalpel through rot. She didn't dress like the boardroom crowd. She didn't talk like them either. That was exactly why Elias wanted her there. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to be the crack in the ceiling where sunlight got through. A soft breeze moved through the diner as someone opened the door. Outside, the city buzzed. Construction crews, buses, morning chatter. Life had already moved on. But for the two of them, the weight of everything still hummed beneath the surface. Maya folded the job offer back into the envelope, holding it carefully. When I first slipped you that note, she said softly, I didn't actually think it would change anything. Elias tilted his head. Then why do it? Because somebody had to. Elias met her gaze across the table. No suits. No boardroom titles. Just two people who'd walked through fire from opposite ends and met in the middle. Somebody always does, he said quietly. As the clock on the wall clicked toward 9, Elias finished the last sip of his tea. The taste was the same as it had been that first day. A little bitter, a little sweet. But everything else had changed. Maya reached across the table. Not in fear this time, but in quiet solidarity. A simple, steady touch on the edge of his cup. For once, Elias didn't feel like the lonely billionaire in a glass tower. He felt human, grounded, seen. And for the first time in years, he didn't mind staying. Headline flashes across a nearby TV screen mounted above the counter. Billionaire CEO goes undercover, exposes crime ring in his own company. Waitress turned whistleblower testifies in major federal case. A customer glances up at the TV, then at Elias sitting quietly in the corner. He doesn't recognize him. He just goes back to his eggs and coffee. And that's how Elias prefers it. Maya finishes her coffee and stands. Ready. Elias nods, rising slowly. He slips on his green overcoat, the same one he wore the day this story began. Outside, the rain has stopped, and the city smells like wet pavement and clean air. They walk out together. The bell above the diner door jingles one last time, soft and certain.
Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed it, let us know in the comment section. Trust me, you're going to love the next one even more. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the like button to stay with us for more gripping stories.